Hello, my name is Nura Rachelle. Thank you for tuning in with me while we connect about the Jupiter cycles. This is part of an ongoing series where I'm doing all of the different planets and really walking through how we can consciously transform with the transits, or as we know in evolutionary astrology, consciously evolve. I'm an evolutionary astrologer first and foremost, along with some other modalities. I'm also a yoga instructor, herbalist, mama, and student of life, and my current fascination is Jupiter, and rightly so. For all of my other Transforming with the Transit series, I've been grouping different planets together, but when I thought about what to do with Jupiter, I thought, okay, we need to 100% do Jupiter by himself. Jupiter is just too big to, talk about him in conjunction with anybody else. Although in this presentation, I'm going to talk about how Jupiter aligns with the outer planets first and foremost, and how we can use this information and sort of map out our cycle so that we can make the best of Jupiter transits. So Jupiter is our higher self aspirations. He is our consciousness expansion. He is intuition, right brain. All things having to do with expansion. So again, this can be for good or ill, but at its most basic, we want to be broadening our horizons and our perspectives. We want to be looking at how we are opening, how we are growing, how we are learning, and really translating our left brain mercurial style of learning into Jupiterian wisdom. And that bridging comes through experience, right? So that's real learning. Jupiter is also linked to liberating, but for the purposes of expanding beyond what we thought was possible, different than the Uranus type of liberation. Jupiter is also a teacher, a guru, and where we have Jupiter in our charts is really something that can tell you about your process of philosophizing in the world. How do you open? What's your way that you make meaning? It's how you open, it's how you expand. It's also what you are inspired by. Jupiter rules Sagittarius and traditionally ruled Pisces as well, and so there's still that affinity. We just had Jupiter in Sagittarius for the past year, just before the recent ingress into Capricorn, and so we got to have a really intense exploration of truth in Sagittarius. So thinking back over this past year, what's come up for you around your belief systems? What's come up for you around the way that you are looking for truth, the way that you are communicating truth? In the body, Jupiter is not seen as causing disease, but can expand or exacerbate disease where it already exists or is culminating. And so this is especially true if Jupiter is left unchecked by Saturn. And this is where we start to think about tendencies toward obesity or just too much of something in some way in the body. And so when we're looking at Jupiter transits, we can also consider this in our bodies as well. Jupiter can potentially enlarge an organ. For example, the heart, if Jupiter's trine the sun, which rules the heart. And so that's just an example of maybe somebody in their natal chart may have this kind of aspect. Jupiter is also associated with sugar and sweet taste and the storage of glycogen in the body, and smooth muscle, and think about muscular activity. Jupiter can really be connected to a sort of way of how we move through the world, similar to Mars in that it's that guiding force, our philosophy. How do we create meaning? And so therefore, how do we need to move to create that meaning? And you can think of Sagittarius, the archer. He's half horse, half man. He's running on the ground with his arrow pointed up towards the sky. Maybe he's, pointing his arrow in a couple different directions until he starts to ground and settle and eventually find that single pointed focus, that true path of meaning. Some Jupiter fun facts. So he is the fourth brightest object in the heavens, and this is after Sun, Moon, and Venus. So you can go outside and see Jupiter with your naked eye, which is a really good way to connect with his magic and with his wisdom. Jupiter is more than 11 times the diameter of Earth. He's a gas giant. He's 1/10 the diameter of the sun. His orbital period is 2/5 of Saturn. Jupiter has the fastest rotational rate of all the planets, and this causes bulging at his equator. He's a gas giant, and he's made of 90% hydrogen, 10% helium. And this was really interesting to me. He radiates more energy than he receives from the sun. He has that giant red spot, which is a long-lasting storm or a vortex of winds, really emphasizing that movement. There's a lot of movement here happening, and it's really big. And so you can correlate that to what's happening with your intuitive mind, the abstract mind, how you are making meaning. There's a lot of movement and different parts and different dynamics of how we connect to that meaning. Jupiter also has at least 79 moons. There may be more. 79 have been discovered. And the four most popular are Io, Europa, Callisto, and Ganymede. So at its most basic, Jupiter's functions are to expand, open, align with higher self perspectives, to learn and to teach, to intuit, and to grow. So Jupiter's cycles, and this is in relation to a natal chart. And so at birth, we have where Jupiter is stationed in our chart. Every 12 years, or between 11 and 12 years, we're going to have a Jupiter return. So you can look at the ages around 12, 24, 36, 48, and so on. And all of these times are marked by this expansion in some way, shape, or form of consciousness. I can think back to a personal example when I was 12. That was when I was given a higher degree of responsibility, for example, a lot more babysitting. And I can also remember I started to level up in terms of what I could even understand about the world. And then again at 24, big conscious expansions around relationships and marriage and partnerships and so on. I haven't made it yet to the 36th. I'm more in the Jupiter opposition in between those two. But you can start to look in your own life and see what is happening for you around these times. In what way did something big, new, something expansive happen that expanded your level of consciousness? And so again, you want to look at where Jupiter is in your chart by sign and house, and also aspects, because these are going to be essentially re-triggered completely every 12 years. But since evolution occurs through this spiral energy, we might seem like we're coming back to similar themes, but it's always from a higher vantage point. We're always returning to themes from greater wisdom, greater experience, and therefore greater refinement and ability to really use that energy. So we also can look at the first quarter squares, the last quarter squares, and the oppositions. And of course, you can really look at any aspect from, the sextiles, the inconjuncts, semi-squares, sesquiquadrates. You can look at all of those to flesh this out a little deeper. But these are the primary ones that we tend to work with when we're, trying to understand the basics of the Jupiter cycle in a chart. And so every 3 years from the return, so that's literally it between ages 2 and 3, and then 14 or 15, 26, 27, 44, 45, and so on down the list. This is that first quarter square, and that's really carrying the energy of crisis and action. That's really carrying the energy of perhaps a slight amount of inner tension, but you're trying to put out into the world and make manifest that which was divinely seated in your psyche, in your consciousness around that return. And so that's a similar dynamic within the structure of all of the planets in relation to themselves, in relation to other planets. We can look at all of the different phasal relationships to see more or less how that planet might be relating with itself or how it's relating with another planet. And so that first quarter square tends to bring up the tension that is required for the individual to really take action on whatever information or energy they were given around that return. Very similar to a new moon, right? We are downloaded and divinely seeded this information around the new moon time, and this is once a month, and we tend to really start to take action on it and be able to visibly see it a lot more around that first quarter square, and this is when we're really taking action on it. And then we go to the opposition, so similar to a full moon, full phase type of energy where we're really finding completion, meaning, culmination of a cycle, looking at it in its highest illumination and really maximizing the potential, maximizing the energy. And so at that 6-year point from the return, and so again, this is quite literally at between ages 5 and 6, or 17, 18, which is that second opposition, 29, 30, which is that third opposition. That's right where I'm at. And let me tell you, it's been really interesting and intense because that one's corresponding also to the Saturn return cycle. And so you start to notice too, when you start to overlay the different cycles on top of one another, you start to actually be able to pull out these key years that span pretty much across the board for all people, because this is just the way that these cycles go. This is how they repeat. And so you can do the math and ask how old somebody is, and then you know, oh, this is where they are in this cycle and this cycle and this cycle. And maybe they're working with 2 or 3 different intense aspects across different cycles. And as we'll see later in this presentation, there are quite a few cycles that are renewing and coming to a close and a new beginning right around the same time, primarily in the signs of Capricorn and Aquarius, and I'll get into that shortly. And another part of this Jupiter cycle that I wanted to touch on is that last quarter square. And so that's 9 years from the return, or 3 years before the next return. And so this is around age 8 or 9, 2021. That 2021 time correlates with that first Uranus square. And so that's a really big time of individuation and really discovering who you are and what you're leaving behind from your childhood and what you really want to bring forward as an individual, as an adult. And the last quarter square for Jupiter is sometimes connected to that feeling of being a little bit jaded by what has come at the beginning of the cycle. And so if you think about that 2021 time, that's corresponding to the original conjunction or that return that happened around 11/12. And so that's a pretty big jump, right? Think about how different you were between ages 11, 12, and then ages 20, 21, right? You tend to be almost ready for the next phase by the time you're 20, 21, and you're starting to actively release, starting to actively let go of the beliefs that were seated in you when you were a child, when you were beginning puberty, and so on. So you can start to think about that. Let that ruminate in your psyche while we continue through this presentation. So Jupiter cycles with other planets. This is important to know because then you can start to catch more or less intuitively where we are in a cycle. And so with inner planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, it's about 1 to 2 years. It's more than 2 years with Mars, and it's just about up to that with Venus, and about 1 year with Mercury. And this is because they move so quickly. And so I do think it can be really useful to look at those things, and I'm going to mention some of those that are happening this year in some of the future slides. But I also think that it's the outer planets that we are going to get more profound, long-lasting individual and societal shifts of consciousness, because the outer planets are slower moving and we're just spending more time really grounding into and integrating the wisdom of the shifts. So the Jupiter-Saturn cycle is just under 20 years. The Jupiter-Uranus, Jupiter-Neptune, and Jupiter-Pluto cycles are also around 13 years. Sometimes the way that they move, especially depending on retrograde cycles, is a couple months before, a couple months after. And so at each of these conjunctions, there is a frequency of evolution that is set that then carries through the entirety of the rest of that cycle. So say we know that Jupiter, Saturn, the last time that Jupiter was conjunct Saturn was in Taurus, and that was about 20 years ago. And we can now reflect on this entire past 20 years and think, okay, how as a society were we focusing our beliefs and our structure and form around Taurus energy. So even though both of those planets have clearly moved through all of the signs almost, except for Saturn in that case, it's still all coming back to the basic foundation of the energy that was set by Taurus at the beginning. And so we can think about what we know about Taurus, which is stability, reliability, values, money, resources. Think about all of the economic ups and downs that we've had since 2000, 2001. And so I'm going to get into where and what we're shifting into. So to understand more about Saturn and Jupiter as a planetary pair, it's important to know Saturn standalone. What is his function? And so he's all about lessons, self-mastery, discipline, insecurities, challenges, social conditioning, internal, external authority, parenting, or the process of reparenting. And this also goes for that social conditioning. This can be deconditioning as well as reconditioning or finding a new level of conditioning. And there's a couple different meanings of conditioning, right? We can use the word programming as like our cultural social conditioning, but we can also think of like doing a workout and you're conditioning yourself to get stronger, to be able to handle the stressors of life in the future. And so Saturn rules both of those definitions of conditioning. Karma and Dharma, it's Saturn's job to keep us aligned with our karma and our dharma, our path. And similar to that friendly, stern grandfather who's going to hold your hand and say, nope, sweetie, you're not going that way because that is not your path. Even though, you know, maybe all your friends are doing it or society has told you you should go that way. But, you know, this part of you, and thankfully that part of us is, you know, tapped in. It says, no, don't go that way because you will be unhappy. Don't go that way because it's not for you. In certain times of our life, we really have to have these blinders put on us so that we can't even see the other choices, the other options, so that we are limited, so that we are restricted, so that we are confined to that karmic and dharmic path that's right in front of us. So that is Saturn's function. So that limitation that we associate with Saturn is not necessarily this negative thing. It's all for the purposes of evolution. It's also that we stay aligned with our incarnational promises of how we are going to make the world a better place. Saturn is also our maturation process and how we get real with time. Our souls are infinite, but these bodies that we are currently inhabiting are not. The energy will shift. And so when we start to really ground into that realization that we do have limited time here on Earth, we start to have a greater appreciation for the truth and beauty of life. We start to have a greater gratitude and awareness and practical understanding of the fact that we're not really here to do it all. We're here to do what we came here to do. And so Jupiter and Saturn together, this is how we put together beliefs, which is Jupiter, and reality, which is Saturn. This is the structure of our consciousness. This is how we structure, Saturn, our higher self aspirations, Jupiter. And also contained within this planetary pair, this relationship, is to what degree are we deconditioning from belief systems that don't serve us? And so you want to know the relationship between your Jupiter, Saturn in your natal chart. Are they conjunct? Therefore, in that new phase of instinctual awareness, are they in that crescent phase, first quarter phase, gibbous phase, full phase, disseminating phase, last quarter phase, balsamic phase? Which phase are they in? And then look at the aspects. And that's going to tell you more or less how you're relating to the structure of your consciousness and to what degree you might be working with that energy. Are you here to change it? Are you here to ground it and carry it forward, right? Like there's different parts of the cycle are going to tell you what you're doing with the energy as it comes together. And then you start to layer on top of that the transits. And so this is when it gets extra fun. And you can compare the transiting planetary pairs and their conjunction points with different areas of your chart. Say, for example, we know that Jupiter and Saturn are going to conjunct at 0 degrees Aquarius at the end of next year, 2020. Where is 0 degrees Aquarius in your chart? And now how does that chart point relate to both Jupiter and both Saturn in your chart, right? That could give you a lot of information. Or say you have a planet around there. Now that function of that planet who's stationed around 0 degrees Aquarius might in some way have a greater impact on your natal Jupiter, natal Saturn way of relating and functioning in your life. So at its highest, this is about finding a healthy level of alignment with society, because we're not necessarily meant to just do everything that society says, but we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater either. There are a lot of beautiful things that we've learned from our parents, but there's also a lot of really destructive, treacherous things that we've learned inadvertently from people who, despite their best efforts, have also just been perpetuating cultural programming. And so it's, you know, to what degree are we going to align with society or go our own way? This is also looking at healthy boundaries, and then seeing how they can work together to contain you and support your higher self aspirations. Some more Jupiter-Saturn vibes. Jupiter is function, Saturn is form. And so function is the unfolding of the purpose, which is the sun in our chart. And it's the development and the growth and the dynamic flow and movement of how we are actually doing all of these things that we're here to do. Form, which is Saturn, this is the structure that we give to our reality. These are the boundaries. And an example that I really love when I'm working with Jupiter, Saturn together is that of a hot air balloon. You can think of Jupiter as the hot air and Saturn as that balloon skin that without that skin, you just have hot air going up into the air. What are you really going to do with that? You can't do anything with that, right? It needs to be contained to be able to carry you where you want to go. And you can also go even further with that metaphor and consider the relationship between Jupiter and Saturn is, you know, the person that's inside the basket controlling where the balloon is going, up, down, left, right. Are they going far away from home? Are they staying close to home? And home could be another metaphor for cultural conditioning or the beliefs that you were passed down, religious ideas, and so on. Because this is really, as a pair, these are societal beliefs, otherwise known as religion. And whether we use that word or not, we definitely have religious tendencies as a culture, right? I mean, arguably our current religion is that of money. And my thoughts on this are that it's based on that recent Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Taurus, which is about money. And so, you know, looking at this upcoming one in Aquarius, this may bring this societal religion into the realms of technology, which is arguably also quite evident in the world, right? Elon Musk is putting out the first microchips to go inside human brains. I mean, this is actually happening. This is not even just a potential. This is already happening, right? And so now all of the conversations around ethics and being in a more or less post-moral society, it's really about what we choose. It's not about something necessarily being like right or wrong according to anybody else. It's just really have awareness of the gravity of these choices, and that relationship between Jupiter, Saturn, and technology, Aquarius, the future, how we progress together as a group is going to become very, very important to consider. And we won't, even as individuals, if we're not dealing with that as much personally, we won't be able to avoid it when we're interfacing with society, because that's going to be the primary emphasis of what's going on. And so for more on some of the wording here and this delineation of Jupiter as function, Saturn as form, I recommend pretty much anything by Dane Rudhyar, who is also Jeffrey Wolf's Green, one of his favorite astrologers. And one of his books, New Mansions, New Men, is where this information came from on the Jupiter chapter. And another one is Astrological Timing, the Transition to the New Age, which is, I've also taken some information from in this presentation as well. I also think it's important to look at what's going on with the glyphs of Saturn, Jupiter. So we know that the glyphs carry meaning as well. And so these are both the arcs of consciousness, and these are the crosses of matter. And so in Jupiter's case, the arc of consciousness is above the cross of matter. And so it's really grounding consciousness into our current experience. And then in Saturn, it's reverted. So we have the cross of matter on top of the arc of consciousness, arguably saying that it's that matter that matters the most. It's on top of the arc of consciousness. And so when you put them together, now we have more of a balance. So here we have some Jupiter-Saturn cycles, and all of the tables that I'm sharing come from Richard Knoll at astropro.com. He gives a lot of great tables for basically almost all of the planetary pairs. So you can look up conjunctions, squares, oppositions, I believe, between all of the different planets. And so I've only taken a very small cross section within, at least here, the 140 years or so. And so you can see in 1961, there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Capricorn. In 1980, there was one in Libra, and then in 81, Libra retrograde, and then 81 again, Libra. So there were 3 Libra Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions within the span of about a year and a half. And then 2000, the one that I referenced earlier, was at 22 degrees Taurus. And so again, we're in the balsamic phase of that right now. We're finding the highest spiritual essence of the energy of Taurus as it relates to our societal beliefs and our cultural religion. And then thinking about how that applies to you as an individual. What are your priorities? What do you value the most? And how does this relate with your overall beliefs about life and the meaning that you're giving to your life? Arguably, most people tend to make meaning based on how much money they have. Are they doing a good enough job in life? Well, look at their bank account, look at your house, look at the material possessions you have, and that's more or less how we've measured a Saturn term, our success, a Jupiter term, right? Arguably, that's all about to change. So when we're looking at December 21st, 2020 at 0 degrees Aquarius, perhaps we have this new opportunity, right? Because every conjunction is this new phase, new instinctual awareness. We're not entirely sure what the whole thing is going to look like. We're playing with it very instinctively. There's not a roadmap necessarily. And so while we are engaging with this Aquarian energy, we have to remember there's not a roadmap. Similar to, all of the stuff that we've been working on while we're in this transition between, the age of Pisces, sub-age Virgo, and moving into the age of Aquarius, sub-age Leo. This is new territory for us. It's not about morality when it comes to making choices for technology and all of those kinds of things. It's not like God is going to punish you, so to speak, if you do or do not have an iPod, or if you do or do not have a Google Home, or if you do or do not choose to get implanted with some sort of chip device, right? But it's about having the awareness of what these choices will mean, having the awareness to be careful, to be cautious with the changes that we are implementing around technology. And so again, there's no right or wrong, so to speak. It's just, what do we choose? And when we think about the energy of Aquarius, this often correlates to big changes, big shifts. Aquarius is ruled by Uranus, who is associated with sudden change. And sometimes when we're not ready for that change, or when it's cataclysmic, it can be traumatizing. And so my hopes and prayers for humanity, especially as we go through this big shift, this big change, this great conjunction, is that in the years to follow, that whatever changes are made, that there's a soft landing, right? And so this requires us to have that practical orientation. We can look at then within this cycle, when Jupiter and Saturn are opposing, that's usually when you start to see the karma evolving. You start to see more or less, okay, what have we done with this? Is it good? Is it bad? Do we want this? Do we not want this? And what needs to be changed or cleaned up as you continue through the cycle? And so we might start to see more around 2030, 2031, some of the more obvious manifestations of what we are about to seed at the end of 2020. And then 2040, go back to conjunction in Libra, 2060, conjunction in Gemini. Hopefully you're noticing a pattern here. These are all air signs. And now you notice we've got these couple earth signs, that conjunction in Taurus, that conjunction in Capricorn. They tend to work in cycles of similar elements, of the same element. And then when it shifts into a new element for the next however many cycles, it's called a great mutation. And so right now we're working predominantly with air. And so this is ideas, this is logic, this is rational thinking, this is science, this is also relationships. This is how are we communicating and relating with the world. And so you can take a look at some of these points, especially if you were around for some of these earlier dates, what has been seeded in you around that time, or, you know, more or less what have been the themes that came up for you in relation all the way back to these original conjunctions between Jupiter, Saturn. So here we have December 21st, 2020 at around 10:20 a.m. This is Pacific time where I am located. And we have Jupiter, Saturn conjunct 0 degrees, 29 minutes of Aquarius. You'll notice Pallas Athene has been hanging out pretty closely with Jupiter, as I'll show you in another chart as well. We've been working predominantly with a Capricorn stellium, which I'll also show more later on in this presentation. But now you'll start to see, you know, we're getting a little bit closer to that Aquarian energy. We're calling in more of the future. Right now, and arguably the rest of the time that Pluto is in Capricorn, we're really working with all of this deconditioning. We're working with these evolutionary desires of the soul to really purge the guilt, the shame, all of the negative ramifications of the past karma. We're really working through this overall shift from, you know, the pain and the lower energies that came with the shift into patriarchy, and now we're coming more to a greater balance between masculine and feminine. And so there's a lot of that going on underneath the surface, right? Because Pluto is that why of everything. But now the ways that we're doing it, the ways that we're engaging with it culturally, socially, for the next 20 years, they're going to have that energy of Aquarius. So it's going to be very strong energy of the breaking through, the liberation, the emancipation from the past. Perhaps maybe we'll start to see greater reparations for slavery, for example, right? Capricorn is associated with slavery, and then Aquarius is that emancipation. So we might start to see that. We might start to see, like I mentioned before, greater technological advances that, you know, again, we have to make sure that we are really feeling into what makes the most sense and coming at that from a place of personal empowerment rather than giving our power away to technology. Really having an awareness of the innate biological technology that we have. And arguably, if we're able to master that first, we'll have a lot greater appreciation for the degree that we want to engage with technology. So this leads into Uranus. So the functions of Uranus are to liberate, awaken, emancipate, shake up, break through. Sometimes this is break down to break through. To change, have to remember that Uranus mantra, to choose change before change chooses you. This is tearing down old structures, innovation, and having insights from that individuated unconscious part of our psyche. So Jupiter-Uranus cycles are very focused on this liberation of beliefs, this liberation of how we are connecting to our higher self aspirations. How are we doing it? And so a lot of times with Uranus, it's almost like we're getting these insights from our subconscious mind that are happening at a time when we're ready to expand our consciousness to that level. And so these happen about every 13 years. And you can see, so 1983 in Sagittarius, 1997 in Aquarius, a lot of big shifts with the internet and all those things around 1997. And of course, looking at Uranus's connection with technological advances and how they look and the specific parameters of them. In 2010, we had two, one in Aries, one in Pisces, retrograde. 2011, Pisces again, based on that retrograde. So you notice anytime we're working with a retrograde conjunction, there's going to be three of them, right? 3 Sagittarius, 3 all around this Pisces retrograde point. And here we have 3 Cancer, and those will be later on in the cycle. The next one that we have to look forward to is April 2024, and this will be at 21 degrees Taurus. And so with Uranus traveling through Taurus, a lot of this could come down to agricultural, technological advances. And then when Jupiter gets involved with this is going to make it a really big deal. This is going to be something that we can't avoid collectively. This is going to seed a new level of consciousness and how we work responsibly, hopefully, with the earth, with sustainability, with money, with resources. Neptune's functions are to dissolve, to disintegrate or integrate, right? Because sometimes we need to take parts of us away that are illusion, right? But sometimes we also need to integrate these fragmented parts of us. So there's different times that you're going to see Neptune kind of doing different aspects of that. At its most basic is to dissolve anything that is in the way of our connection to spirit. So Neptune at its highest essence seeks to spiritualize and to serve, to heal. Sometimes this can lead to confusion, but then there's that dance of confusion, clarity, confusion, clarity. And we tend to feel more of the confusion during the retrograde time and tend to come back out into clarity when Neptune stations direct. But arguably this transit with Neptune and Pisces, we're working through all of this all the time. But again, you can look at where you have Neptune and Pisces transiting in your chart to really connect with how that has been manifesting for you. Another function of Neptune is to merge, blend, find oneness. This is idealism as well, overcoming deception and transcendence. This is also fantasy. So a lot of us collectively, we're working through our fantasies, and in certain ways, how do we want to ground those into reality? In other ways, how are they pulling us away from our ability to live in a grounded way on Earth? So again, that's that dance between confusion, clarity, and fantasy, reality. This is also when Jupiter gets involved with Neptune. Now we're seeing an expansion of that. Whatever our process in the dissolving whatever's between us and spirit is going to get bigger. We can't avoid it. That's kind of what's going on as a general rule with Jupiter. We can't avoid the growth, the expansion that wants to happen with Jupiter. And we have to remember too that expansion happens in an accordion-like style. We expand and contract, and in that contraction time, we're kind of integrating and reflecting, and then we expand again, taking a little bit more information, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of energy to expand. And so that contraction time can also be quite welcome, right? And then we expand again and come back in. And so we have to remember that just because Jupiter is typically associated with being benevolent and happy-go-lucky, leaving you gifts and all of those things, there's also something that needs to be let go in order for the gift to arrive. And so with Jupiter Neptune, what beliefs do you need to let go in order to be able to receive the gift, which is essentially alignment with higher self and source consciousness? It's It's a pretty good one. So, letting go of the fantasies that are in the way of that, it might seem very painful and very challenging to do that while you're in it. But arguably, there is a time beyond that, which you start to feel into the new rewards that come from greater alignment with timeless truth, right? So we can remember that Jupiter rules Sagittarius, Neptune rules Pisces, and that Jupiterian, Sagittarian quest for truth is, pales in comparison to the Neptunian owning of timeless truth, right? And so both of these symbols have to do with this transcendence of consciousness and connecting to truth. So again, some of the relationships here. And so again, it's about 13 years or so, most of them. And in 1971, we had 3 conjunctions in Sagittarius. 84 and 97, we had 2 conjunctions in Capricorn. In 2009, we had 3 in Aquarius. 2022 will be the next one that we experience, and that will be in Pisces. And then again, moving through the list into Aries and Taurus. Pluto's functions are to transform, to transmute, to mutate, to engage in life, death, life cycle consciously, to evolve, to empower, to balance power, to align with soul level desires in relation to the functions of the other planets involved in the Pluto aspects. And then of course, this is tying in the North Node, South Node, planetary rulers of the North Node, South Node, and again, looking at in the evolutionary astrology paradigm that Pluto is the bottom line why of everything. So when we have Jupiter coming together with Pluto, this is like higher self aspirations connecting with the bottom line why of your entire soul level desire for incarnating in this body, in this life. And arguably, we choose similar themes to work on over many lives. And so when Jupiter comes together with Pluto, this is beliefs, this is expansion, this is waking up to higher and brighter and lighter levels of consciousness in connection with powerful transformation, in connection with true soul level alignment. And so you can see between 1943, 1955, and 56, there were 4 Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions. And again, these ones between 55 and 56 are occurring around a retrograde. So again, we get to do it 3 times whenever a retrograde is involved, right? We get to do it the first time, and we get to look at all of our mistakes during the retrograde period, which brings us to a second time. And then that 3rd time, we get to do it again, yay, from a higher vantage point, from a higher level of consciousness. Then in 1968, we had the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction in Virgo. In 1981, in Libra. In 1994, in Scorpio. Another thing to note, too, is that having the Jupiter conjunct Pluto is really, in your natal chart, is showing a profound strength in connecting to your higher self aspirations, in connecting to truth. That's something that you were seeking to evolve on a baseline level. So if you were born in any of these years around these degree points, you already know this as a primary underlying foundation of your whole why in this life. And then all of us via transit get to experience this from time to time. This can be very, very powerful individuals. Then we come to 2007, which was our most recent one, and that was in Sagittarius. Look back to around this time. What new seeds of consciousness came up for you around belief systems? Many people may have found that their belief systems completely changed, like, from one year to the next. And The next one we get to look forward to 3 conjunctions. So that's April 2020, June 30th, 2020, and then November 12th, 2020, between 24 and 22 degrees of Capricorn. And of course, the reason why we get to do it 3 times is because there's a retrograde. So yay! All of the stuff we've been avoiding in our subconscious around guilt and shame and patriarchal wounding, we get to get rid of it. We get to focus our energy on this work so powerfully, so magnetically, that there's no way we are going to be able to avoid this growth. There's no way as a collective, as individuals, that we will be able to pretend that we don't know how it is that we need to grow and in what ways our consciousness is expanding. And again, I have such high hopes for humanity. I'm a Sagittarius. I'm an eternal optimist. I believe that we are getting better and better and better at this, that while there may be, you know, that big group of consensus thinkers who maybe are not questioning things quite so much, there are a lot of people on the leading edge and who are doing really amazing, beautiful things to really further the expansion of consciousness, just conscious living, not necessarily belief systems based on morality of right and wrong, but just conscious living and reconnecting people with their power, to take back power that has been stolen via the patriarchy, to take back power that has been stolen in general, basically from the entire feminine half of the planet, and historically as well, the power that's been stolen from the feminine and also from minorities or whoever happened to be at, you know, whatever bottom end of the pyramid at any time in history. There's a reclamation of power that is returning for all of us. And so my thoughts on this are that 2020 is going to be a big year for this. So you want to look at, where do you have between 22, 23, 24 degrees of Capricorn in your chart? And look at exactly what that means for you. What house is this in? Do you have planets there? I'm really curious about my Capricorn stellium group. The Cap stellium occurs a little bit in earlier degrees of Capricorn, but if you're in any way, shape, or form connected to the Capricorn stellium group, likely you've been working through a lot of profound changes in the foundations of your life. And so again, look at any aspects to this point, look at any planets there, and of course, look at where this is transiting in your chart. Because this will not happen again until 2033 in Aquarius, and then 2045 in Pisces. You can also look at Jupiter transits in relation with the nodal axis, so north node or south node. And so that we know that the north node is the path to bliss and the activation point for our conscious evolution, which is of course led by Pluto. We're usually less comfortable with our north node early in life, tending to live out more of the south node, but then we start to get sick of that. You know, usually around our first Saturn return, we start to release the attachment to the validation of our south node, and we start to feel into the possibility and potential and new forms of validation represented by the north node. And we start to see more of its rewards in our lives. We integrate south node and north node and realize our potential for growth, happiness, and the feeling that we are doing what we came here to do, really living out our life purpose and the soul intention that occurs over the course of many lifetimes. And so here you can see Jupiter north node cycles. Of course, the Jupiter south node cycles are basically the every 9 years in between here, more or less, or sorry, the halfway point, I should say, between all of these. They're not 9 years. They're about 7 years. So about 3.5 years, you're going to see that opposition with Jupiter coming together with the south node. And so the most recent one we had was Jupiter in Virgo conjunct the north node in Virgo in 2016. And so as a collective, whenever we have a planet conjuncting the north node, it's like full steam ahead in relation to the energy of that sign that the north node is in. And so Virgo, a lot of this was the self-improvement, self-development, personal development, health, expanding our awareness of our health. And the next time we will have Jupiter North Node conjunct will be in Taurus in 2023. So we have a couple years for that. But again, looking at the elements, these Earth element Jupiter North Node conjunctions that we're currently situated between, this is bringing up a lot of attention to the body, to resources, to Earth element in our lives. And so here we come to the great Capricorn stellium of 2020. This is happening January 11th, more or less. I mean, arguably we have a lot of these, the stellium energy is strong for the whole month of January. You just have different locations of Mercury back here or over here. And then eventually Mercury and the Sun will leave Capricorn, but then Pallas Athene joins Capricorn. So there's going to be a chunk of planets, predominantly Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, throughout the whole year. And so adding in the strength of our conscious awareness via the Sun and Mercury, we're really going to be able to work with this a lot more consciously at this time of the year. And so again, this is about the time when we start to reflect on the year that has come before. We're starting to get ready for the holidays, and then comes the new year that we celebrate in our, Gregorian calendar. And this is a time when a lot of us start to feel into what our intentions are for the following year. What is it that we're calling in? What is it that we're trying to release, and so on. And so knowing where this Capricorn stellium is in your chart is a great way to be very consciously aligned with the energies that are going to be moving through your chart. Whenever I'm reading a chart, especially a transit chart, I'm looking at, first and foremost, of course, the karmic axis and what's going on with that. But when I want to look at themes for the year, look at Jupiter. Jupiter stays in a planet for about a year. Look at Saturn. He's there for about 2.5 years. So looking at the signs that Jupiter is in, that Saturn is in, and then of course Pluto and the karmic axis, this is going to give you this nice broad brushstroke emphasis of a theme that will be carrying through that entire year. And so my thoughts on Jupiter in Capricorn is, this is a year of personal responsibility and dedication to really living out our higher self aspirations in the most aligned way possible. And all of the different series of Jupiter conjunctions, the primary two that we'll be working with this year being first Pluto 3 times because of the retrograde, and then with Saturn at the end of the year in Aquarius. This is that energy that is really calling us to ground into the reality of our lives, to look at our lives, to look at what we're building, to look at what is at the foundation. Is the foundation based on truth, right? Is the foundation based on illusion? Is it crumbling beneath the surface and you're just, hanging on to it with dear life? Is it built on pain and the requirement for healing, right? Especially when Jupiter comes together with Pluto, there will be that profound emphasis on deep soul healing, this metamorphosis, this flight of the phoenix, this expansion of a new way of being and relating with our soul level intentions. So here are some of the specific dates for most of the Jupiter transit. This isn't getting into every single trine and square and sextile, but I've included a number of them here, which will be good to look at. And so around the time of this recording, we have Jupiter in Capricorn square Chiron in Aries. That's December 8th. And so again, squares bring up tension, sometimes frustration. And so that energy of my personal healing, Chiron and Aries, with my beliefs about society, Jupiter in Capricorn, how are those at odds with each other? In what way am I resolving the way that I've positioned my own personal identity and my own healing journey with what's going on in the world, right? So you might still be feeling into some of that depending on when you're watching this. And then we have Jupiter in Capricorn trine Uranus, retrograde still in Taurus, and that'll be December 15th. And that's again going to bring the ease of relationing. And that's of course going to bring the ease of relationship between Capricorn, Taurus, resources, money. How is our career supporting us in our resources? All of those kinds of things. There could be perhaps greater abundance flowing at this time. There could be greater awareness on things that you can do that will improve your abundance, improve your prosperity in the future, especially perhaps when Uranus comes out of retrograde, stations direct. And so there's a couple different things that this could manifest as. And then looking in 2020, we start the year out with the South Node conjunct Jupiter, 8 degrees, 26 minutes Capricorn. And so that's full-on expansion of a lot of the karmic work that we've been doing over this past year with the South Node in Capricorn. We have Jupiter sextile Neptune in Pisces, February 20th. Jupiter was making a series of squares with Neptune over this past year when he was transiting through Sagittarius. And now we're moving into the sextile energy. So the squares were providing that creative tension necessary to really release any limiting beliefs that we had that were really holding us down, that were really keeping us separate from spirit. And now that Jupiter and Neptune will be in this sextile dance, now it's about really putting what we gained from that time of the squares of the creative tension and letting it be opportunities for growth. We're going to have greater opportunities on our mystical path, on our mystical journey, to be able to really connect with timeless truth and to really start to feel into the rewards that come from being able to access that truth. And then we'll have Venus in Aries square Jupiter, February 23rd. Any Venus squares with Jupiter definitely pulling in beliefs about relationships and how you are relating, your patterns of relating, and so on. Juno retrograde in Libra, square Jupiter in Capricorn, that'll be March 2nd. And so again, a square bringing up creative tension or frustration. This is a last quarter square and it's with Libra. And so this is looking at any old stuff in relationships with perhaps marriage, partnerships, general ways that we are relating with our soul contracts, all of those sort of under the umbrella of Juno, and how that's connecting to our dedication to our, and how that's connecting to our dedication to our highest path with Jupiter and Capricorn. Then we have Mars conjunct Jupiter in Capricorn, March 20th. So that Mars conjunction will make it very easy for us to take action on our beliefs. Venus trine Jupiter, again, that's going to pull up stuff with relationships. Pallas Athene conjunct Jupiter. This is going to bring a lot of creative intelligence, new ideas, new ways to be creative with what it is that we're grounding here on the earth plane and how those connect to our higher level truths and the dedication and all the things that we're working towards with Jupiter and Capricorn. We'll have Jupiter conjunct Pluto at 24 degrees Capricorn. That's April 4th. Very powerful time to look at setting intentions, to look at what is being divinely seated around our way of evolving and how that is aligned with our higher self. Sochi, stop. Lie down. Come on. Go. Sorry, Sochi, I just can't. And then we will have our Jupiter stationing retrograde at 27 degrees Capricorn, May 14th, still within 3 degrees of orb of Pluto. Jupiter retrograde conjunct Pluto, who will also be retrograde at 24 degrees Capricorn. That'll be June 30th. Then we have Pallas Athene retrograde again, conjuncting Jupiter, also still retrograde July 3rd. And so there's a couple big names here. Pallas Athene is going to be coming together with Jupiter a couple times, Jupiter with Pluto a couple times. And so again, looking at how this is coming together as this overall story between all of the planets is going to help make everything make sense. And so you start to notice some of the names that are repeated, like we have Pallas Athene coming together with Jupiter, and she's all about creative intelligence and the balance between masculine and feminine, and in Capricorn, which is also about gender identity, gender issues, and all of those kinds of things, the shifting between the patriarchy and the matriarchy, and this reclamation of the power of the divine feminine and sacred masculine, and so on. And so you can start to sense into and have a greater appreciation for the kinds of shifts that we're really looking forward to this coming year. We then have another square between Mars and Jupiter, August 4th, Venus in Cancer opposing Jupiter, August 25th. Jupiter will then station direct 17 degrees Capricorn, September 12th. Mars retrograde in Aries will again square Jupiter in Capricorn, October 18th. Venus in Virgo, another Venus-Jupiter trine. So really looking at the earth signs in general this year. So if you have earth signs, planets in Taurus and Virgo in relation to Jupiter and Capricorn, this is really going to expand their reach as well. This is going to expand their potential to really manifest something beautiful in this current year. And then thinking about the other cardinal signs like Aries, Libra, Cancer, right? That's the squares and the opposition. And so where you have planets there, those parts of you are going through a different kind of integration process, a different level of creative tension and or problem solving. Jupiter conjunct Pluto for the third time, November 12th, and then the great conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn at 0 degrees Aquarius, December 21st. And so these are dates that I would highly recommend for everybody to put into their calendar. There's definitely more important dates during the year, but when we're talking specifically about Jupiter, this is how Jupiter is mostly involved this year. And so we have a couple really powerful Capricorn conjunctions, and then again, some powerful squares and trines, especially with Mars, Venus, looking at our patterns of relating. Mars and Venus are also masculine, feminine, and then we're working with the axis of gender, working with this Cancer Capricorn, primarily releasing all of the conditioning around that with Capricorn. And so you can start to feel into how is this manifesting in your own life? How is this manifesting in the lives of your friends around you, what you're seeing on the news, what you're connecting to with in the collective. So another reminder about the energy of a conjunction. It's the circle divided by 1. It's 2 or more planets coming together, and this is the strongest potential of their merging, blending, and communicating. This can be harmonious or challenging. One of them can start to feel maybe eclipsed by the other, or they might not know themselves individually, and it's really creating a new level of synthesis between the different functions involved. And so again, looking at the synthesis that's occurring between Jupiter, Pluto, that's occurring with Pallas Athene, Jupiter, that will be then occurring with Jupiter, Saturn. These are going to be new levels of synthesis of their functions, and it's going to be flavored by the signs that they're in. There's really this combined force of synergistic energy. Again, Capricorn stellium group, this is everybody born roughly between 1988 and 1991, and that would be including Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, but you may have a slightly different Capricorn stellium later on in this decade if you're born in the 90s with, including other personal planets. And so definitely this group of people who's also right around their Saturn return time, this is a pretty epic time. Considering if you have your Saturn right at the very beginning of Aquarius and you have the great conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn happening at the same time that you begin your Saturn return, that's another really big thing to look at too when you're coming into your Saturn return, what will be shifting there for you. So again, the energies can eclipse one another. So we want to make sure that we really understand how are they all working separately, but then how are they also an entirely different form when you put them together. The opposition is the circle divided by 2. And this is the natural division, right? Masculine, feminine, self, other. This is the inherent duality of life. And this is all about the integration of opposing energies, finding balance, finding wholeness, internal battles. And if we do not deal with our internal oppositions, they become external, right? So then we're working with projections. This can start as a challenge, but it can also become a major strength and new synergy or gift if we're able to work with them consciously. And so again, looking at some of the big oppositions, if you're working with any big oppositions in relation to Jupiter this year, look at how different parts of you are finding integration of truth. And so again, we can look at the natural axes of energy, right? We have 12 signs, but we have 6 axes. We have 6 different oppositions: Aries, Libra, Taurus, Scorpio, Gemini, Sagittarius, Cancer, Capricorn, Leo, Aquarius, Virgo, Pisces. And something that Jeffrey Wolf Green reminds us of is that conscious evolution involves looking intentionally at our oppositions and endeavoring to consciously integrate that which is the opposite of any single planet, right? So if you have your sun in Capricorn looking at the exact opposite degree of Cancer, right? Same with all of the planets. We work with this very easily when we understand Pluto and Pluto polarity point, and also south node to north node, but you can do it with any planet wherever they are in the chart, and that's going to really support you on your journey of conscious evolution. And we have the square. This is where we're looking at creative tension and friction, but there's very much the potential for great achievement if mastered, right? So looking at some of those big squares that are happening this year in relation to Jupiter, or if you have Jupiter squaring planets in your chart, look at how these 2 different archetypes can work together to achieve the same goal, and what ways you're going to have to stretch what you think is possible in order to make that happen. The trine brings ease, and we can really use our gifts to master our challenges. And so again, looking at the potential for all of the earth trines happening this year. So that's the ease of energy flowing between Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn. The sextile, this is the planets that are 2 signs away from each other. So the natural sextiles to Capricorn are going to be Pisces, which is that last quarter sextile, and it's also going to be, and so the 2 types of sextiles that we have the sextile, which is all about opportunity and requires initiation. The planets are going to be 2 signs away from each other, so we can look at the different sextiles that we'll be having this year, which would be planets in Pisces, but also if you have any personal planets in Scorpio, you would be working with the energy of sextile from Jupiter. Of course, we can look at the inconjuncts or the quincunx for how we are making adjustments. And so these are going to be the signs that are 5 away. And so if we know that Jupiter in Capricorn is inherently opposite Cancer, you look both at Gemini and Leo. And so any planets in Gemini or Leo, you're going to be working with adjustments in relation to those planets and how their idea of truth maybe needs a little bit of adjustment in order to fully align with the potential that comes from Jupiter in Capricorn being all about dedication and personal responsibility. So making the most of Jupiter transits, it's really about connecting with your higher self perspective through meditation, writing, visioning. This is a great time to come up with a vision board and make it very Capricornian. Look at the house that you have Jupiter in Capricorn transiting through, and also, you can draw out or write out the imagery that you associate with that house. It's just a great time to consciously grow and expand your awareness. And so whether that's through traveling and connecting with different cultures, physical travel or astral travel, right? Meditation, creative visualization. Great time to spend time in a circle of philosophers and read consciousness expanding books, right? Connect with information that is going to expand what you thought was possible about the world. And in Capricorn, making those things about dedication, personal responsibility, your career path, and then again, the house placement that you have Jupiter transiting in. And again, how does this relate with your natal Jupiter? Always pull it back to that. How are they relating as well? And this is going to show you specifically how your perception of truth is evolving this year. So observe your life with gratitude, question things, and get outside and choose some aspect of nature to connect with, to observe natural law. Capricorn rules mountains, so this might be a good year to take a trip to the mountains and really connect with the wisdom of the mountains. Thank you so much for staying with me for this presentation. If you have any questions, please send them here. You can find me on my website or on Instagram, and otherwise I look forward to hearing from you if this resonated, any questions, and I wish you the best in your conscious evolution journey this year with Jupiter and Capricorn. See you next time.